Welcome to the Draft Deeper podcast. This is your host, Nathan Grubel. Joining me as always is my producer, Kevin Black, my co-host, Stephen Gillespie, and joining us for our first NBA Lottery Team podcast.
Yes.
You knew we were going to start with the Detroit Pistons because they drafted Cade Cunningham last year. They're going to be back in the lottery this year. So obviously we're going to talk about some big board fits that might be able to pique the Detroit Pistons' interest, but we wanted to have somebody on who can also reflect on the season and give us some thoughts about the Pistons' young core, what the offseason outlook might look like, and then, talk about the draft, because that's what we do at Draft Deeper, and there's nobody better than Motor City Hoops himself. Coach Bryce Simon has actually been doing a great job posting video breakdowns of prospects for the 2022 NBA draft over at MavsDraft.com. Friend of the show, Mavs Draft, Richard Stamen. So definitely, if you haven't checked out any of that work, please go ahead and do so. But everything else, Motor City Hoops, if you're a Detroit Pistons fan, Bryce Simon is your guy. Coach Bryce, how you doing, boss?
I'm good, man. Thank you for having me, Nathan. I have been excited about this all day long, all week long, ever since you reached out. Me and Steven's my guy from back in my Motor City Hoops days.
Yes, sir.
Now the Pistons Pulse podcast with Omari Sankofa II, Pistons beat writer for the Free Press. But me and Steven met back then. We stayed in touch. We talk hoops, I don't know, every couple days. And so I'm juiced for all of this.
Absolutely. So we got a pretty big show planned. We're going to see how much ground we can cover. I'm confident that we can cover it all because we're all basketball junkies here. That's all we want to do. We just want to talk hoops. But let's start off very general before Stephen and I will have a bunch of different questions to ask you. Bryce, what are some of your thoughts overall about how the Pistons season went in your opinion? I mean, there's some positives, there's some negatives. I'm not going to spend a lot of my time running through the synergy percentiles for the Pistons because we could guess how those ultimately turned out. But we're not here to slander the Pistons. We're here to ultimately give a positive outlook on the team, right? Shout out to Molly Hunter of the Overstated NBA group on Facebook. Big Pistons fan. We want to do her justice. We want to do this podcast and the Detroit Pistons team justice. So just give us some of your more positive takes from what you saw this season.
Yeah, so I think people had really high expectations coming into the season. Jerami Grant was coming off a really breakout season in the NBA. You draft Cade Cunningham #1, had some good rookies in Saddiq Bey and Isaiah Stewart. Obviously, talking about 2 years ago, expectations were too high, guys. They were by me. And we learned very, very quickly that we needed to temper our expectations, and getting better in the NBA doesn't just happen overnight. Cade started off the season injured, didn't play the first few games. Isaiah Stewart rolled an ankle practicing with the Olympic team. And then Jerami Grant got hurt. KO got hurt eventually. Kelly Olynyk. Eventually post All-Star break, that's when you really started to see this team show some signs. Saddiq Bey even got off to a really slow start. Cade did even when he first played. So eventually you start to see those guys play together, play well, see some of the things you want to see. Eventually you get excited about being at the top of the lottery again. And I'll just say this. Fans are still super excited about this organization, Troy Weaver, and the potential for how it can grow.
There were so many directions that the Pistons could have went with that #1 overall pick. And it was made publicly known that as you bring up Troy Weaver, it's a good segue. He was exploring a bunch of options with that pick. It wasn't just Cade Cunningham. It was Jalen Green was a very hot name that the Pistons front office really liked. Evan Mobley, we saw what he was able to do this season for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Despite where you might have had him on your personal big board, I think regardless, he was in contention for the #1 pick because of the blend of size and skill, and that's just where the NBA is going. But in a different way, Cade Cunningham is also a blend of size and skill, right? It's not like he's a 6'2" point guard. He's a 6'6" point guard, has a really good frame to him. I think he's going to fill out just fine. I know I had some concerns about him physically coming into the season. I think that was definitely part of what held him back, at least early on in the year, but he still finished 17.4 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, 5.6 assists, 1.2 steals per game. At the end of the day, That is a really, really good rookie stat line. And I know I referenced Molly earlier. She always gives me crap because I didn't predict that good of a stat line for Cade in his rookie year. I was off by about 2 in each of those major categories. So it wasn't too far off, but he definitely was better coming out of the gate than I expected. So Bryce, what are some of your more general Cade Cunningham thoughts before we get into some different aspects of his game?
So one thing I always love to talk about with Cade Cunningham is how good he is and how impressive he was on the court this year, guys. He was even more so off the court. I would, which of those rookies, and we don't have to get into the rookie of the year debate. It's over. It's done with Scotty Barnes.
We could technically have a little bit of it.
We might talk about that later, Bryce. I mean, come on, man.
I literally don't care. I don't care whether Cade got a single vote or not. Cade Cunningham was everything this organization needed him to be on and off the court. He is mature. He was a leader of grown men as a rookie. And everything I've heard, he did it in high school with a bunch of talent around him, including Scotty Barnes. He did it in college. He was obviously the best player on that college team. And he came in with the Pistons and he did it right away. That's what and he put on the buffs on draft night. He endeared himself to the city and Detroit. That matters to people.
He loves Detroit. He truly loves Detroit.
And Ashton, the trainer, his trainer loves Detroit and the fan base loves him. And I think that matters to me. Maybe it's because I'm a fan, but I think it matters in general. The organization hit a home run with that pick, not just with how he was on the court, but also how he was off the court.
Was he definitely – I was just going to say, was he definitely the guy you wanted out of those top 3 for the Pistons?
He was, and I've done a lot more draft scouting this offseason than I did last offseason, and I'm new at doing the Piston stuff. I'm only 18 months into this. Not this season, but the season before was my first time doing the podcast and all of that stuff. And so I wasn't quite as into all of it, but yeah, everybody I talked to, Steven, Richard Stamen, all of those guys, I talked to everybody enough that Cade Cunningham was the guy. And so that's who I wanted. I want to drop this little nugget. There was a report that came out that the top 3 guys, one of the top 3 had a really poor workout for the Pistons. And it's come out since that it was Cade Cunningham. So it makes you wonder, how close was Troy Weaver not to taking him because he didn't have a good workout per reports?
Yeah, that's really interesting because, I mean, from everything that we're seeing from front office, from coaching staff to obviously fans such as yourself, Bryce, that he endured himself quickly. He ingratiated himself quickly into that culture. And I mean, Detroit, for everything that we could talk about with their recent struggles, I mean, it's a very historic franchise. I mean, you had like 2 runs of bad boy eras, a whole bunch of history and culture with
going
that
to
team.
Work, Chauncey Billups, Ben Wallace.
Absolutely. I mean, some of the most fun teams I watch, being from Arkansas myself, seeing Corliss Williamson on that team. I was a big Corliss guy whenever he was on that squad. So if you could just talk about how specific to just like the Detroit Pistons history and culture that Cade Cunningham has kind of shown himself to be, is there like a lot of like talking with some of the older heads that used to be, a part of that team? Is he like learning from other pros or former pros, things like that?
I do know Ben Wallace is around. He's a part of the organization. You see him at games. He's the main one. Obviously, Chauncey's a head coach with a different organization, with the Blazers. So I do think, like, I can't help but wonder, and this is going to sound like I'm trying to knock Jalen Green, and I'm not, but I don't know that Jalen Green has the personality that would have endeared himself to the city of Detroit and the fan base. For the star that Cade is, one of people's favorites highlights of his this season is him like locking somebody up and then diving on the floor for a loose ball. People talk about it and retweet it. That's just what it is to be a Piston and to be a Pistons fan. And so I do think of all those guys at the top, he's the one that kind of fit that mold the best.
Before I think Steven wants to go into more developmental questions with Cade and get into a few of the things that he definitely noticed with Cade, I do want to say about the conversation around those top 3 guys and who could have possibly went to Detroit, right? I said it from the start when I was mocking these guys, like the draft played out at the top how I would have wanted it to play out, right? Like I thought Cade was the best option for Detroit because, in my opinion, he was the number 1 guy, or he would have been the number 1 guy on my board. I did a tier system more or less last year than like an individual 1, 2, 3, 4 type of ranking, but he was in that top tier for me, along with Jalen Green, because I thought they had MVP level ceilings, not just they could reach an all-star game or two in their career. Like, I'm talking part of some of the highest ceiling, but Cade in a different way. Jalen Green, we know that he's a remarkable talent, and I think he's only going to keep getting better and better and better. We saw that especially at the end of the year. But Cade, yeah, you hit the nail right on the head, Bryce, talking about the leadership aspect, how he's just one of these guys you can funnel everything through, and you know that he's only going to keep getting better. And he already showed enough signs this year that he can be that primary guy. He has the ball in his hands. He can go get you a bucket whenever you need him to get you a bucket. The passing, I think, is going to translate more and more as the Pistons bring in better guys around him, which is something we'll definitely touch on a little bit later in the podcast. But you guys needed that type of dude on the perimeter. Mobley's going to be a special player as well. I don't know if he's a number one. I kind of still have some of those questions. He's going to be one of the best number twos in the entire NBA. Like, that's not even up for debate. And I think that's why Cleveland had much better personnel to surround him. But like, not even just from embracing the culture type of person, but like from a fit perspective, you definitely think that Cade was the best for your Pistons.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit it all nail on the head right there, as you said, because they needed that number one guy, the face of the franchise guy. I don't think Jalen Green, he's a bucket getter, right? And like he might average 30 a game for a couple seasons. Like, I would not be surprised if he does that in his career, but I still don't know if he's like the face of your franchise guy that's just like the leader that galvanizes everybody. That's what Cade Cunningham is. He did it as a rookie, and I realize the Pistons suck. Like, let's just be honest, they were not good this year. Like, I can admit it. I understand that. But I watched every second of this young man play. I watched every second of Pistons basketball the last 2 seasons, and there's just something about him. There's people gravitate towards him because he just has that aura about him, and there's a lot to get better at. So I realize I'm like boosting him right now. I get it, and we get overly excited about this kid, but there's plenty of like on the court stuff this kid has to get better at as well.
Well, let's talk about that. I know Steven wants to get into some of that. So let's get into it.
Yeah, for sure. I'll jump right to this question here for you, Bryce. We talked about the intangibles, the leadership qualities and all of that. I think spot on from everything that I've seen. And certainly you've watched more Detroit basketball than I have. So it just makes me feel better that the things that I'm seeing that you're seeing as well. It makes me feel better about myself, Bryce. So thank you. But let's talk about what we're looking at for him moving forward, right? Like we talk about, the dive on the floor, because when your leader does that type of things, like everyone else is without excuse. Like if Cade is like your prized future of the franchise, is hustling and doing everything else on the court, then everyone else is without excuse. So it's great to see him do that. But what else do you think that the team and himself should be focusing on moving forward for year 2? Like, obviously, I think 10 years down the road, you would like to say that he's an NBA champion, he's a multiple-time MVP, things like that. But for his sophomore season in the NBA, Bryce, like, what are some realistic expectations that you and maybe the fan base and from what you're hearing from the team are putting on him?
Yeah, so for me personally, and I don't know, I may be a little different than the rest of the fan base on this. I think he needs to bulk up even more. I think he needs to put on some strength. And because that's his game. And I'll be honest, I pushed back a little bit on the Luka Doncic comparisons because I don't want him to be as heliocentric. I know that's kind of the buzzword, but I do think their games are similar because Cade's not going to beat you with like the athleticism. You alluded to it earlier, Nathan. He's not a super athlete. Like, he's not like a top tier NBA athlete by any means. He uses it with like just subtle movements, this in and out dribble. He lulls you to sleep. He changes speed. And if you're stronger, if he's 10, 15 pounds stronger, he can utilize those angles and get to those spots on his floor even better. And he can, go to work in the mid post where I think he has a game there that he just hasn't shown yet. So for me, it's 10 pounds of muscle, whatever's most realistic.
I think that's definitely what I really noticed coming into the season, Bryce. I mean, when I was out in summer league and I was watching him, I hadn't gotten to scout him live, but before he got to the NBA, but really in summer league, I noticed how skinny he actually was, and I was like, holy cow! Like I didn't realize he was that thin, and I know that like he's a vegan, and like those are some of the things, the dietary choices that go into that as well. But yeah, I would agree with you. I want him to be able to safely add weight and keep bulking up, because one of the things that he doesn't really have that Luka does have is when Luka operates out of the pick and roll, he's not the quickest guy either, but he can get somebody on his hip and he can keep them there. That's some of the in-between craft that I think Cade needs, but you need to have a certain level of strength to be able to do that. And then I think when he gets downhill, it's going to be more about you see when he tries to finish around the basket, he can finish at some awesome angles. He has some really good touch on some runners, floaters around the basket, but some of the angles that he approaches, they just aren't the best of shots. They're really tough angles to take. So I think when more of his game downhill becomes less of, I need to go around guys and maneuver around guys to finish some of these plays, when he gets to the point where he can go through more of the defense, then he's really going to start getting to the free throw line more and really upping his scoring average and being a more efficient offensive player overall.
Yeah, and he finishes well with his left hand, but I think he wants to play the way you're talking about, but you saw like he gets the chicken wing out there a little bit too much because like his body just doesn't absorb it.
Yeah.
And I think the added strength, and I'm sure you're going to ask about these, Steven, will help in a couple other categories in terms of his 3-point shooting, which was very, very erratic and inconsistent this year. And turnovers. I think it'll help with some of his turnovers. Now, some of that is decision-making and careless passing, but some of his turnovers, like he just gets the ball ripped from him as he's driving. He takes a little contact and he loses control of the ball.
Yeah. And I think as a rookie too, Brett, like on a team like this, with the talent being what it is, with the expectations being what they are, I think a lot of, a young guard season, or in Cade's case, I don't even necessarily know if you classify him as a guard, as just an overall playmaker, right? He's got to figure out what he can get away with, right? Like that's part of the developmental process, and having a coaching staff and a front office that believes in him and are willing to put those developmental reps and minutes into him, that's huge for him, because that can boost his confidence. Like knowing he has the freedom to go out there and try some things against like higher level of competition, because let's face it, with the teammates that he had coming into the NBA, he still has a lot that he had to figure out about himself as a player and a leader as well. So I'm glad that you addressed the shooting efficiency and the turnovers. Let's flip sides. Let's talk about the defense. Like, what did you notice in particular with him? Because I mean, Nathan, you and I talk about this all the time. Like, we don't necessarily expect like young dudes to come. Not everyone's Herb Jones, ladies and gentlemen. Like, not everyone could come in and guard every other team's best player. And positionally, some people feel like the position that you play in the NBA is the position that you defend. So with that being said, Bryce, like, how do you evaluate his defense, and what are some of the improvements that he needs to show on that side?
Before Bryce gets into it, like just the defense, I was so interested to evaluate Cade from a defensive standpoint at Oklahoma State, even more so in the offense. Like you can go back and watch enough of the Monverde highlights to know like this dude's going to be really, really good on offense, but defensively, he has the size at 6'6". He has the length. He has the positional understanding to be able to play angles, not just on the ball, but also off the ball. Like he can kind of be a rover a little bit too, and be a defensive playmaker on top of, once he keeps adding to his body, like guard people one-on-one. Like, yeah, it's talk about the defense a little bit, because I think he has a really bright future on that end too, not just offensively.
Yeah, so I want to go back real quick, and then I will get into the defense, but he really did get everything thrown at him in his rookie season. He was getting blitzed and doubled and expected to make and again, not to knock anybody else, but what other rookie was being asked to do all those things throughout the entire? So here's what I love is in his rookie season, he is learning about all those things. And he's a guy that is going to learn from those game reps. Okay, defensively, again, this isn't going to sit well with a lot of Pistons fans. I think his defense is a tad overrated by Pistons fans or fans in general right now. I think he has all the things you guys talked about. I did a post All-Star break defensive breakdown of Cade Cunningham for DetroitBadBoys.com. I didn't think the on-ball defense was super great. And I think I'm glad you brought that up, Steven, because I'm trying to figure out who are his best matchups. It's not little guards. It's not the Trae Youngs and the Steph Currys of the world, I don't think. Is he better off guarding bigger wings? And if he puts on 10 pounds of muscle this offseason, is he going to be able to match up with those type of guys better? His basketball IQ is so good that I do think he's a really good off-ball player. Even though he's not super bouncy, he can provide some like low man, weak side rim protection. But I think there's some room for improvement with Cade Cunningham on the defensive end.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of us would agree with you. But Nathan, you spoke to the potential that he has on that side of the ball. I mean, whatever the appropriate pounds of muscle that he needs to add, Bryce, I'm with you. Like, I just want functional muscle mass. Like, whatever numerical value you slap on there, that's I'm all for it, right? So, Nathan, looking at this and everything that Bryce said, I'm glad that we got into this Cade Cunningham discussion. But Bryce, just one more question that I have for you, specifically for Cade, and then I'll turn it back over to Nathan. Is again, preface this just for the aggregators out there. Cade still has a lot to figure out. He's going to be really good, but still has a lot to figure out. For his rookie season, like what moment could you point to, because you've watched every second, what moment could you point to be like, okay, like this is our guy, he's figuring it out? Like, is there like one like moment, or was it like a stretch of games or maybe a month? Like, what could you point to be like, okay, Cade's the guy?
There was a lot, but there was a showdown with the Nets and Kevin Durant where they just went back and forth, and it was like, he's doing this against Kevin Durant. Like, that's got to mean something. And then he talked about it, and he talked about how he had always dreamed about playing these guys. And you kind of got the vibe that maybe he was still getting over, I don't want to say starstruck, but getting over that he's going toe to toe with these guys. And so I just listened to that quote and thought to myself, he's going to be even better next year, because he's not going to be thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going toe to toe with Kevin Durant. It's just going to be, I've been here, I've done this.
I'm not a fan anymore. I'm a basketball player.
And I'm not saying that the moment was too big for Cade Cunningham, because very few moments were. I'm just saying you could tell there was still a little bit of that. Can I ask a question? I always do this.
Sure.
Like, come on, people. What do the synergy numbers say? Because I know you guys are big synergy guys.
Oh, boy.
I'm sure Nathan's got it called up right.
Boy.
And I don't think they're great. Like, a lot of people come at me like he wasn't efficient. The numbers don't tell a great story. I don't know how in-depth synergy goes defensively, but I would just be interested, like excellent, good, poor, below average with some.
Bryce, before Nathan gets into the numbers in specific, I think that this has been a running theme that Nathan and I have been talking about on like all of our recent podcasts, is that there's really not like a true defensive metric that you can point to that's all encompassing, because like Bryce, as a coach, as a player, you know that anything that you get defensively is more so, for whatever reason, a reflection of how the team did, right? Because even if you do your job as an off-ball defender, you're going to give up a point per possession, right? Like if someone scores. So there's really no like all-encompassing defensive metrics. So I think that people who would just look at the numbers instead of like combining all the data, like maybe they can paint like a more negative picture. But as someone that watched the game, Bryce, I'm sure that you could probably speak to it a little bit more because of how close to the team you are.
Yeah, no, and I'm the same way. I have a hard time buying into any of the true individual defensive metrics, but I was just curious what synergy had offensively and defensively for him.
So, I mean, well, I didn't know which way you wanted to go. From a defensive perspective for the team, they were 22nd out of 30 teams. So actually not the worst. They were much worse on offense, as you could have probably expected. The Cade, even though Cade only rated out in the 16th percentile offensively, he had some bright spots, right? Like scoring out of the pick and roll as the ball handler. He was in the 46th percentile. That's not bad for a rookie at all. When we evaluate rookies, if you're like in the 40th percentile or above in a category, it's worth mentioning it as a good thing that you saw during the season. If you're in the 75th percentile or above in something as a rookie, holy crap, like we definitely need to make sure that we're highlighting that for the player.
And we also need to focus too, and Bryce, you could speak on this. There's like there was a shift in play style too, where like early on in the season, Cade wasn't necessarily like the pick and roll ball handler as he was as the season went on.
And I would say early in the year, Pistons fan would say he wasn't the focus of the offense. It was still kind of Jerami Grant's team, and there was this awkwardness between the two, and like and Cade the whole offense got off to a historically bad start, like shooting from three. I think they ended up like 29th, but they were 30th by a lot at one point early in the season. Saddiq was playing awful. I went through the whole thing earlier. The team didn't really figure out who they were till halfway through the season. They started playing a little faster, and Coach Casey let them start playing a little more pick and roll because they got Marvin Bagley III. Maybe that's not a popular name for people. He did make a difference for this Pistons team. And
we'll talk about him more later.
Okay.
We'll talk about him more later.
Okay, perfect.
But just like some positives to highlight with Cade, as I mentioned, the pick and roll scoring, the spot up scoring, the isolation scoring, even when he would take smaller guards in the post, he had fairly efficient numbers for a rookie in terms of those play types. Really, the biggest things, the negatives that we would come back to for Cade that the numbers definitely agree with would be, you talked about Bryce, you don't want him to be this ultimate heliocentric player for the Pistons. You want to see a little more diversity within the offense. If that's going to happen, he has to be a better guy around the basket, only rated out in the 30th percentile. And we know that comes back to a lot of the body stuff that we talked about, but also the jump shooting, in particular, the catch and shoot shot, 35th percentile and catch and shoot shots. That has to be an area of improvement moving forward, especially if he's going to play next to another ball handler, which I'm sure we're going to talk about the Killian Hayes experiment at some point. But like, even if Killian Hayes isn't the answer, but you want to find another guy to take over that role, he's got to be a better player off the ball, catch and shoot shots, as well as cutting into the basket, getting involved, getting downhill.
No, I agree. The shooting was a disappointment, right? I mean,
not off the dribble though. He can create his own shot.
Yes.
Stepping in off the catch, he's got to get better.
Absolutely. But he shot 40% from 3 at Oklahoma State, and it was 31%. But I don't know that I'm concerned. I'm a little bit nervous. Like I was probably overzealous thinking like, oh yeah, he's going to be a 40% 3-point shooter. And it's like, now I'm a little bit more like, he's probably going to be like a 35% 3-point shooter throughout his career. And I know some players have wide variance, but if he's doing it off the dribble at a high clip, that's good. But you're right, Nathan, there's a lot of clips like going through my head, not specific, but like I can kind of envision good offense gets to Cade Cunningham and you're like, oh, this is our dude. This shot's going to go down, and he doesn't make it. So he started off the season 0 of 18 from 3 also. And that's part of why.
That was back when he was a bust, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
That's what
okay. So I have to mention this.
Go ahead.
I literally wrote an article for DBB, and I had to go look it up the other day to make sure like I didn't dream this. I'm getting old and forgetful, but
I can relate, dude.
You're talking to two grandpas, so it's all good, man.
After 2 games, I had to write an article that said Cade Cunningham is going to be ... just fine, and outline a whole article about how he wasn't going to shoot 20% from the field and 0% from 3 for his whole career. And he was doing all this other stuff, including solid defense, creation, all these other things. And I look back and I'm like, I literally was getting texts like, oh, your boy's a bust. I'm like, he's played 2 games.
Chill out, people.
I think it really comes back to the fact that a lot of the negatives that I can point to really point back to his body. And the fact that if that's really what we're concerned about, when natural development for these guys 4, 5, 6 years down the road points to the fact that he's going to be just fine in the area, it's going to open up everything else for his game. What are we talking about here? Like he was number 1 for me. He's still number 1 for me. I think he's going to be the franchise-changing player that we projected. The one last question I'll ask you, Bryce, before we move on to some of the other guys. You did mention the passing, and you did talk about at times you thought the passing could have been a little careless. And not that we want to bring that up as a full negative and something we want to harp on for Cade, but it's important because you did bring it up and you did recognize it, but it points back to the debates that people had about Cade Cunningham before the draft. A lot of the case against Cade Cunningham and that whole propaganda narrative. And I roll my eyes every time I saw a lot of that stuff, but that was one thing that did pop up, was that is Cade as good of a passer as we're really advertising him to be? Because like the turnovers were basically the same in college as they were his rookie year. The assist to turnover ratio, some of the points you could point back to on tape, like, what do you think about his passing after watching him in the NBA for a year?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought this up. So I said I've watched every single game this past season, right? I also, a couple weeks ago, went back and watched every single turnover from Cade Cunningham's rookie season and tracked it based on, was it a strength issue? Was it a ball handling issue? Was it a poor decision or poor pass issue? And overwhelmingly, it was poor pass, poor decision issues with his turnovers. Like that's, and you would expect that's where most of them come from. I realize inherently that's where they're going to come from. But I think he's a good passer in that he sees everything he needs to see. He can make every pass you need him to make. He can make the going to his left, one hand, scoop pass, all of that stuff, over the head pass. He just makes real lackadaisical decisions. I don't know if people like that word or not. I don't know how else to explain it. There's just, or careless, however you want to say it. I'm like, there's times, Cade, your basketball IQ is so high. Like you should have known not to make that pass. You got to value the ball more. And I know that's coach speak, but that's how I felt.
Do you think it's more assist hunting versus like he actually can't see the multiple levels of the defense? Like after he comes off a screen, do you think it's more that he isn't seeing what's going on? Or do you think it's honestly like I think I can thread the needle here. I think this is going to be a bucket, like, and that comes back to a careless decision.
I never thought it was like, oh, he doesn't see the secondary rotation or anything like that. I think it was sometimes he predetermines things. Like he's really good with eye manipulation. So a couple times he's using his eye manipulation, and I don't know. I don't think this shows on video, so I look really stupid right now doing this. But
oh, you look great, dude. You look great.
He's doing his eye manipulation, and he thinks he's going to move the defender, but he doesn't move the defender, and so he ends up throwing it right to him. So he's kind of predetermined his decision. But again, I think he makes the reads. I think he sees it all. But even some like post-entry stuff, it's like, Cade, come on, man. Like you can make that pass. Why is it 3 feet short? You know, I don't know why we're throwing it to the post anyway. But so I keep going.
Are you doing your boy Stewart like that, man? Come on.
Isaiah Stewart needs a few touches. Not a lot, but a few. But it was careless. That's the best way I can explain it. Is it just too many careless, lackadaisical passes?
And I think too, Bryce, before we close on this, is that me personally, young guard figuring out the NBA, I would rather have a guy who can make those passes, just has to figure out the timing aspect of it and let the game slow down for him, right? So as much as we can, especially you as a coach, right? Like you're using your coach speak, like you got to value every possession. Like when he matures and the game slows down for him, having the ability to make those passes and see those things is going to, you know, blossom into something beautiful for your team.
Yeah. I'll say real quick, and I know we really do need to move on to somebody else, is if it's the same number next year, then I think you start to be like, maybe this is just going to be who he is in the NBA. But if you see even a small improvement next season, I think that gives you some hope. Like he'll slowly figure it out year by year. He's always going to be a high turnover guy because he's going to be a high usage guy.
Exactly.
But you would like to see some small improvements for sure.
So let's move into a few of the other guys. I did want to talk to you about Saddiq Bey, and I'm not going to take full credit for this question, but along with giving some of your general Saddiq Bey thoughts, Bryce, this was Steven's question you wrote down. Got to give credit where credit is due, and I love it. If Detroit is a good to great to possibly championship level team, like obviously in a better place 2-3 years from now than where they are right now, Saddiq Bey is the blank best player in the rotation. Like what type of offensive outlook do you see Saddiq having moving forward?
Number 4. And again, I don't think people are going to like that, but I think that's realistic. Maybe number 3, depending on who 1 and 2 are, but I think he's your 4th best player.
I would agree with you before you go. Like I think
Same.
you're not crazy. I would agree with you.
Same.
Okay. My ceiling, whatever you want to call it. And I text Steven, I want to have the ceiling floor conversation about prospects. I don't know if we'll have time, but I see him as a guy, maybe he makes a couple all-stars because he's on a team that's really, really good and he is the 4th best player and they get four guys. But if he's your number 3, I'm not sure that you're competing for a championship. He had a really good sophomore season, but if you look at his numbers, like he didn't shoot it that great. He was very up and down. And people will point, well, he scored 51. It was on the Magic, you know, like, I mean, Kyrie dropped 60 2 days before or something like that, or a week before against the Magic. So I like Saddiq. It was a great selection where they took him. I think he's exceeded a lot of people's expectations. I think he's a long-term starter for the Detroit Pistons. But I think you still have a gap between Cade and you need a couple other guys and then Saddiq Bey.
So what are the things holding him back for you? Because he was a really interesting debate before the draft. And one of my older co-hosts, Cole, who I had on Draft Deeper before Mr. Steven over here, who graciously wanted to come on the show and help me out here. We had a fascinating debate about Saddiq Bey because Cole would always highlight some of the stuff that he did in Villanova out of the post and how he had such a much more of a polished mid-range game in college. I said to Cole, I'm like, dude, this guy ended up shooting a lot more threes than you probably would have wanted him to towards the end of his career at Villanova. I'm like, dude, he's going to be a flamethrower from 3. That's what he's going to do in the NBA. He's going to be outside the arc. I'm telling you, that mid-range game and that post game, it's not going to be there in the NBA. He's going to want to be a 3-point shooter. That's almost exclusively what he did during his rookie year. And you go into his sophomore season, that really hasn't changed for him. Do you think there might be a little more to tap into, or do you think that's who he is because that's who he has to be in the NBA?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little bit more. I like his mid-post game. I don't think he's bad there. He's not real creative off the bounce. He doesn't, you just asked me about Cade Cunningham making secondary reads. I don't think Saddiq sees the floor in that way
I would
a
agree.
lot of times. He does at times, but not as much as you would want. And this sounds negative. This has a negative, but he kind of plays bully ball when he gets into the lane. I don't think he has a lot of finesse around the rim. I don't think he has a lot of touch around the rim, to be honest with you. He had some games and some moments, but really he's a flamethrower. He's a straight line driver. He's going to finish at the rim if he can play through contact. He's got a little bit of mid-post stuff. And then quite honestly, again, to get to the other side of the floor, he doesn't guard the perimeter that well. He really doesn't. He gets opened up. He gets his hips turned real early against guys on the perimeter. He's almost better guarding, again, big wings, almost fours. I've made the argument I like him better at the 4, which hopefully won't happen because they'll have Paolo Banchero or Jabari Smith Jr. But
Okay.
But I do think that would be a natural position for him, is actually at the 4.
So just a really quick before we move off of Saddiq Bey, because I know Steven wants to talk about a few other guys, but you did mention the passing disparity. I 100% agree with you, and you wanted to get into some of the synergy numbers because I always have them pulled up.
Yes.
Absolutely, the numbers would agree with that as well. Saddiq Bey rated out in the 53rd percentile in terms of total offense. That's good. That's fine. That's what you want out of a 4th or a 5th option in an NBA starting lineup. When you factor in possessions plus assists, that rating drops down to the 38th percentile, which should be, we're talking average to you're getting into potentially below average territory. So that speaks to more. If you don't necessarily trust him to operate out of secondary play types with the ball in his hands, making decisions, how can you have him operate out of the post if he can't pass out of a double team? How can you have him operate in some of these inverted pick and roll situations if he can't turn the corner well enough and then make a decision after that? That kind of pushes him out towards the perimeter, which is fine. He can shoot threes. We know he can do it at a high level. But if that's really all he is, and he's not giving you everything you would want from him versus from a versatility standpoint on the defensive end either, there's not really much more wiggle room in terms of is there more there for him to be like a 3rd option? But I don't want that to sound completely negative on Saddiq, because sometimes it really is harder to find these 4th or 5th guys who really complement everybody else well on the team. And Saddiq has complemented the other guys with the Pistons through 2 years of, you've had a lot of guys come through those lineups. I mean, the number of players that play for the Pistons, you expect that to be the case for a bad team, but the fact that he's been able to gel at points with virtually everyone he's played alongside of, when the Pistons do end up getting better players and they keep figuring out the talent that needs to be around Cade, and Saddiq has proven he can be there around better guys, and it's probably going to help him in his 3-point shooting out as well.
Yeah, I mean, they played 27 guys this last season, and I know everybody's numbers were up because of the crazy COVID stuff that went on there for a month. Yeah. But Saddiq has also played every single game of his career. He's been an Iron Man in that way. And what's the saying? The best ability is availability, and he's been that.
Go ahead,
yeah,
Steven.
I loved Saddiq Bey. I thought that he should have got picked way higher than what he did in the draft. I'm glad though, Bryce, that you guys are reaping the rewards of having a guy who's a pretty good IQ basketball player. And just real quick, being a 4th option on a championship.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that.
Mikal Bridges is doing all right, ladies and gentlemen. There's nothing wrong with being.
There's something about being from Villanova, right? That's why you like Jeremiah Robinson Earl when he came in.
I was huge on. That's a whole nother story.
Just for the record, I hate Villanova because they ended my college career. So let's ease up on the Villanova love.
All right,
I'm just kidding.
No, Bryce.
They really did end my career, but I don't hate them.
Okay, well, we got to get into that. in a little bit, but we'll move on to Killian Hayes, a guy who did get some number 1 pick overall considerations from certain other NBA draft outlets. Won't get into that now, but got a lot of love coming into the draft, and was had a season, and then here comes Cade Cunningham, and I felt like the drafting of Cade Cunningham would complicate the development of Killian Hayes. And from what I saw, that kind of actually happened, right? But it's one of those things, Nathan, that you speak to. You never draft for, fit. You draft best available,
EPA,
especially
baby.
You at that position. Absolutely. Right. So do you like the fit together? Is Killian a guy that you value long-term on Detroit? And I'm not trying to get you to turn on, one of your own or anything like that, but do you like those two being on the team? Do you like them better on different units? Like, do you like some of the stuff that they do together? Like, could you talk to us about that dichotomy of Killian and Cade?
By the way, second year in the league, 9th percentile in terms of total offense for Mr. Killian Hayes. So not great.
I knew the synergy numbers weren't very good for him. I didn't even have to ask. I like the archetype of Killian Hayes next to Cade, because Killian really is a good defender. He does guard, and he guards on the ball really well. And then you don't have to put Cade, I talked about it earlier, on the other team's best perimeter player. Where my logic is skewed is Killian can't catch and shoot right now. And so I guess that's the archetype of player. Like, I'm thinking Lonzo Ball. Like, that's the type of player I would like Killian to be. And I think that would fit good next to Cade. Now, that's not the only good fit next to Cade. I'm just saying I like the idea of that type of fit. The problem is, what, Lonzo shoots 40% from 3 on 7 attempts a game or something.
Every time Killian Hayes takes a step back jumper, it's just like something's died somewhere. Like, it's just not good.
And
the unicorn dies. Yeah.
I don't think Killian wants to play that role. And I have no firsthand knowledge. Omari doesn't give, even though he's a beat writer, he doesn't tell me anything. I don't get anything but anybody else. But just my observation is he wants to play with the ball in his hands. And you guys could tell me more. He seems like a kid that grew up with the ball in his hands, running the show, and that's what he wants to do. And that's fine. He's just going to have to do it in the second unit. And second unit point guards are I listened to your guys' episode with Rashad Phillips talking about the value of a second unit point guard.
Absolutely.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Is it good value for the number 7 pick? No, that's Troy Weaver's fault. That's not Killian Hayes' fault that he got picked in the wrong spot. I think there's a long-term future if Killian is willing to embrace that. And then maybe you close games with him and Cade at times, which they did this season. I think his long-term outlook is the second unit point guard.
That's actually like where my head went to when I'm looking at what's best for Detroit moving forward, because getting another guy, we see the direction that the NBA is going. And Nathan, we talk about this too, is especially in the playoffs, like, you need multiple guys that can create, that can keep the defense honest. Killian can create, but can he finish? Can he shoot? Can you trust him to make tough reads? Like, those are some of and he's a young guard, and we would love to sit here and pretend that every young guard is going to catch on. But like, some of the best point guards in the NBA, like, took a few seasons before they actually figured some things out. So it's not like the book is shut on Killian Hayes' development or his career progression, but I just think adding a guy like a Cade was going to slow down that progression. And it looks like, at least in this season, it had. So before we close out on Killian, you talked about him in the second unit. Was there a particular pairing of someone else outside of Cade that you saw him be able to do anything with that you were just impressed with? Was it like maybe Kelly Olynyk doing some things between the two of them? I mean, Kelly's an interesting fit in the NBA because he does a little bit of everything. And I feel like when he's on your team, like, he's definitely a team guy. Like, the teams that he plays for, they love him. But then, like, he kind of has like holes in his game that get poked at.
Well, Killian Hayes, like, maybe this is the answer, maybe it isn't. But like, Killian Hayes is somebody who showed a lot of passing flashes before he came into the NBA. Like, is it pairing him with guys like a Hamidou Diallo or maybe like a Josh Jackson, who are willing to cut, who are guys who get moving towards the basket, and then Killian can kind of fire the ball in some of those angles, and you can take better advantage of his passing versus relying on him to be just a scorer out of like pick and roll or spot up situations.
100%. And that's what I'm saying. Him and KO actually kind of butted heads, I felt like, because KO wanted to be the point forward role that he played at the end of the season with the Rockets, and Killian's like, no, give me the ball. Like, what is going on? and then like there was some awkward stuff where like KO actually injured Killian, and obviously Killian's been.
I had no idea, so I definitely eating my foot right here.
No, but you would think they'd be a good pair. I love the KO signing because the pick and pop, spread the floor as a big. So a guy like him, a guy like Isaiah Livers, who most of the listeners aren't going to know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
He was a second round pick, but he came on late. He's another guy that really defends.
They know who you're talking about. Come on, Bryce. This is draft deeper, baby.
Draft deeper.
We had him in the 40s, all right?
Okay, I apologize. I didn't. Nobody's going to like that. So I didn't mean to insult anybody's intelligence.
We got thick skin
around here. We got thick skin, coach.
All right. So but he defends and he can shoot it. So it's like, okay, this can be a disruptive backcourt. They're both long and guard. But yes, if Killian's going to be at his best offensively, it's the ball in his hands, and you better give him a lob threat and 3 guys willing to shoot around him, because he's probably not going to be the one that scores it. He had one game where he went bananas, but it was essentially a G League game against the Oklahoma City Thunder when both teams were tanking. He was by far the best player on the floor, which was kind of exciting to see, but it wasn't against any of the good talent that Oklahoma City has.
And that's probably why him and Cade aren't the best of matches, because you want Cade to have the ball in his hands. And when he's off the ball, we brought it back. He's not a good cutter. He's not a good guy that you want going towards the basket all the time right now in his career. The catch-and-shoot shot was inconsistent. That's like the opposite of what you want around Killian Hayes to take better advantage of those passing situations. So tough fit, but in some second unit situations, working with a different cast of characters around him, there are certain ways to get better use of his offensive talents. And then obviously you get what you get on the defensive side with him as well. So yeah, he's not a bust. I won't use the word bust with him, just maybe not worth the 7th pick. Is that fair to say?
Still a lot of career ahead of him.
Yeah. I would right now, where I would say his trajectory is headed for his career, it wasn't a great value as the number 7 pick. Like it just, and what makes it worse, especially for Pistons fans, is Isaiah Stewart and Saddiq Bey were great values with where they got selected. And that all happened in the same draft class.
Oh man, you brought up before. I think Steven wants to ask you about a certain midseason acquisition, but just really quick on the Isaiah Livers front, man, that guy's making me look bad, because people brought up debates during last year's draft cycle about why would you draft Corey Kispert in the lottery to the mid-first when you could possibly get Isaiah Livers in like the 40s in the second round. And I'm like, no, Kispert, like, this guy had a historic offensive season for Gonzaga. Like, you want to take that guy, but Livers, to his credit, man, especially if he wouldn't have gotten hurt, like, he probably could have gotten first round looks from NBA teams. He is that good of a shooter. I bet you're really happy to have him.
It is, and it's hard as a fan because you always get excited about these guys, right? Like, they play kind of well, and you get over the top excited. It's happened with some other guys, Frank Jackson, Josh Jackson, even at not this season, but the season before, kind of had a nice start to the season, and then it tempered off. But Livers just seems to do the things that you think he's going to stick. Not as a starter. Yeah. He's not going to be a starter in the league, but coming off the bench, he's going to defend. He's going to shoot at a high level, and he has a high basketball IQ. I got to sit courtside for warm-ups. I got credentialed for the one game I got to go to this season, watched him warm up. He's the only guy that came out and was doing like defensive closeout drills. And like, as a coach, I'm like,
that's cool.
I was just like juiced, because I'm like, he's out here, doing closeout drills with John Beeline before he got shots up. So I think he's a guy that sticks and gets some minutes.
Beautiful stuff. All right, so Bryce, now we're going to transition to some off-season conversation before we get to really what everybody's here to listen to. Like, we're going to get into the draft stuff. This is Draft Deeper. We're going to get into the draft. But for the off-season outlook, man, I was so excited to see Marvin Bagley get traded away from Sacramento, because Sacramento, I think that they have a real opportunity, depending on what they do this offseason, to finally kind of like modernize the infrastructure that they have there. But I think that they completely butchered Marvin Bagley. I really loved him in the draft. I still think that there's a lot to like about him. And I think getting the opportunity to run free in Detroit, where, a team that doesn't have the bright lights and expectations, have a very passionate and devout fan base, but you can do more and develop more in Detroit with, you're going to have a fan base to kind of keep some of the other naysayers away from them and protect them, right? So Marvin Bagley on this team, from what I saw, the few games and possessions that I watched of him, I said, man, like, we're starting to see what a little bit of what everyone thought that he could be in the NBA. Yep. And playing alongside of a guy who's going to take pressure off of him and potentially run some great pick and roll sets with him as they both start maturing and growing together with Cade Cunningham. I love that move. But here's the thing that Detroit has to face now, Bryce, because of where he's at in his career alongside his contract. He has a high cap hold now because of how high he was taken in the draft. And he's also a restricted free agent. So maybe another team looks at how he did in Detroit, values that, throws a little bit of a bag at him. Do you want to see him return to Detroit? And if so, like, how high would that be on your list of priorities for your team?
Yeah, I definitely want him to come back. He provides something that no other big on this roster provides. And as we've talked about, you guys have both said, something that Cade Cunningham and Killian Hayes need to be successful in the pick and roll. There were no lobs thrown in Detroit unless Hamadou Diallo caught one on a fast break or, cut back door or something. I love Isaiah Stewart, but he's not catching a lot of lobs. KO is not catching Luka Garza is not catching a lot of lobs. All right. So Marvin Bagley brought something that this team didn't have. He's a bucket on offense. He really is.
Yep.
The defense is something else, and the contract is tough. The qualifying offer is like $7 million, but the cap holds 28, which would take up all of the cap that the Pistons have. I don't know how much they're actually players in free agency. There's a lot of stuff out there. Jalen Brunson talk, Colin Sexton. I don't think DeAndre Ayton's leaving Phoenix. I want to see Marvin Bagley III come back. I really do. I hope, and I think it was reported that they've been working on a 3-year deal for him. I would love something in the range of 3 years, $30 million, something like that. Something less than $10 million a year. Anything over that, now I think you're starting to overvalue him. And the Pistons are in a situation they can't be handing out bad contracts. They can spend money, but they can't spend money bad. And so I think anything under 10 would be a good look for Marvin Bagley III.
I love it, man. And I think I'm right there with you. I think that, like, if I had a Detroit Pistons priority list, I don't know if it's number one, right? Like, I think you got to nail the draft. Yes. You gotta look at what you can get on, and potentially like the second draft is what a lot of people refer to it as. Like Marvin Bagley III is the second draft player because although he wasn't drafted by Detroit, he could be his best version of himself in Detroit. So maybe look to see if there's other players available like that in free agency or via trade. But I don't know, when I'm starting to get around my third or fourth priority for Detroit, like that's where Marvin Bagley starts ringing in for me.
Yeah, I would say the draft. Obviously, that's got to be the number one thing. I would think another thing above him is what do you do with Jerami Grant? Obviously, a big name around the trade deadline. They didn't make the move. Pistons fans were furious.
You are a professional podcaster, because that was going to be the next transition after Marvin Bagley. Just go ahead, talk about what you want to happen with Jerami Grant, because like he's an expiring contract. The best versions of Jerami Grant in terms of higher tier NBA production are basically being more of an impediment to some of Cade's development, right? Like being this on-ball type of guy. So it's really like, do you want him around? Is this somebody where if you can get like a first round pick back or something along those lines for him, like, do you want to move him? Like, where are you at on Jerami Grant?
Yeah, I would move him for a lottery pick. The reports were the Blazers, and that made a lot of sense that move didn't happen at the trade deadline because the Blazers wanted to lose every game post-trade deadline anyway. So why trade for Jerami Grant? And then maybe he wins you a few games. The problem was the Pelicans screwed all that up when they made the playoffs, and now the Blazers don't have the
second lottery pick. Yeah.
Yes. So are the Blazers going to be willing to part with their only lottery pick? My hope is playing in the Olympics together with Damian Lillard, and the control he probably has over the Blazers front office is going to force their hand and make that trade happen. And he slots right into their trade exemption. So I would trade him for that. I wouldn't just trade him to trade him. I don't think the Pistons are in that situation. And Omari brought up a great topic on Tuesday's episode of the Pistons Pulse, that if they don't trade him, they need to give him the extension this offseason, because you don't want him going up to the trade deadline as an expiring contract, because then you're up against it. Like, you have to move him or you lose him for nothing. So don't be shocked if they don't move him and give him the extension, but that may not mean that he stays there long term. You just got to get him under contract for more than an expiring.
And then you would have to wait the obligatory, what is it, like 60 days or whatever. I know it's a few months. Yeah.
So you give him the 4-year, 112, whatever it is. Hopefully not that much. Hopefully it's closer to 100. He's somewhere in the 24, 25 million a year range. And then you can keep him and then trade him at the deadline if the trio of Cade, Bey, Grant, actually it would be a quartet. Is that right?
Yeah.
Of, hopefully Paulo, JSJ, whoever it is.
There's got to be like a cool Motown thing that you can do with that team when you start getting into the quartets. There you go.
Yes.
So I do like to hear from Steven's question that you want to buy into Marvin Bagley. You want to buy into the pick and roll finishing player that Marvin Bagley could be. That's honestly, when I evaluated him in his draft class, Bryce, I really pictured him as like the NBA's version of Silly Putty, right? Like he could be a bunch of different players, but you had to have a clear developmental path
Yes.
on how to actually develop him. And I always thought, it was my best opinion, when some of the people I worked with at the time were like, what do you see from Marvin Bagley in the NBA? I thought he could have been like an Amari Stoudemire 2.0, because when I evaluated him back then, he was so quick and explosive, slipping off those screens, getting into the basket, and then he had the verticality to go up, catch the ball, and finish. I didn't buy that the post stuff was creative with the left hand. I didn't buy all of that translating to the NBA. Didn't fully buy him like being this guy who stretches the floor and shoots like 4 3-pointers a game. I wanted him to be very focused on the free throw line and in. The Kings, for whatever reason, didn't want to develop him like that. So, but you might have a chance at the reclamation project with Bagley, because if that's the player he could turn into, he's still so young. Like that could be massive value for you guys. I love it.
And listen, I know what people are going to say. Like, who are you to say anything about a different franchise? I'm sure I'm going to get some crap for what I said about the Orlando Magic. I have no idea what the Kings were doing with Marvin Bagley. I was so frustrated when the Pistons traded for him, and I went to do my film breakdown, and I literally had to say in my article, I don't know what to tell you guys, because he just stood in the corner. They put him in the corner, and he was a catch and shoot 3 guy. And I'll admit that the shot actually looks decent. It looks like it should go in, but it just doesn't.
You want it to be there as a threat. You don't want him to actually be doing that for the entire game.
Yeah. And so I was like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what we're getting offensively from Marvin Bagley III. And then he comes in and there's some crazy dunk stat. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it was like he had 10 with the Kings the whole year. And then he had 30 in 18 games with the Pistons. And not that dunks are everything, but you could just tell they were starting to utilize him the right way. The issue with him is, guys, the defense is really bad. And it's not it's not an effort thing. I don't believe.
I really don't think it's much of his fault, because where was he going to learn that with the Sacramento Kings in the time that he's been there?
And so that gives me hope, because I think it's an awareness thing. So if you're telling me that maybe that can still get coached up, even though he's 4 years into the league, I have some more hope. But the defensive awareness just isn't good. I think he cares. I think he wants to. He just can't do it. But maybe he'll learn.
I'm more inclined to give him a pass, man. Like, again, like, not to be disparaging to any NBA franchise, but considering where he played, considering like how much has changed during his tenure at Sacramento, I'm willing to give him a little bit of a pass, because he's still very young, young.
Yeah.
So,
very young, very talented.
For everybody listening to this podcast who thought that this was just going to be entirely about Bryce's big board for the Detroit Pistons, listen, you know what? I apologize, but I also just miss talking about the NBA. I miss watching the NBA all the time. Like this was kind of like really good for my soul. It was a little bit of NBA therapy. And I'm
NBA
glad,
chicken soup.
Exactly. And I'm glad, Bryce, that you're able to come on and have some of those discussions.
Bryce is the man. Like, can I just say that in the middle of the show?
No,
like, Bryce is my guy.
No, this podcast has been absolutely incredible, and it can only keep getting better, because we're about to do what we're here for on Draft Deeper. Bryce Simon's big board for the Detroit Pistons.
Let's go.
You're probably going to have a top 3 pick. I don't want to fully jinx it, but I would imagine you probably have a top 3 pick. There's some very interesting options at the top of the board, and I have thoughts about which direction I think you guys should go, but maybe my answer's not the same as you, Bryce. But I know that you've been digging into a lot of the top prospects because of how they could fit in with the Pistons. So you can give us multiple options in terms of how you would rank some of the options at the top of the board, but who is the one player who you think would be the best fit for the Pistons?
I really think, and I don't think you guys, I'll be interested to see if you guys agree with me. I think Paolo Banchero is a really good fit, because I believe in Paolo Banchero as a secondary playmaker. I believe in the ball handling. I believe in the passing. I believe you can give him the ball, have Cade Cunningham set a ball screen, and let him attack off of it. And maybe I'm too high on Paolo. I know the floor spacing when Paolo isn't involved, maybe that's a question. A lot of people think Jabari, like just shooting, Pistons were a really bad shooting team, and I get it. And I'll be honest, I'm going to hedge a little, like they're 1A and 1B for me, but I've fallen in love with Paolo Banchero. And so if they have the number 1 pick, I'd be happy with Jabari Smith Jr. I'd be over the moon. But if I got to make the pick, I would take Paolo Banchero.
2 things about Paolo before I'm sure Steven's going to want to jump in, because I know that he's a big Jabari Smith guy, and I'll let him talk about Jabari, even though I think that would also be my answer for the Pistons, to be honest, and I don't even have Jabari number 1 on my board. But two things about Paolo. Number one, are you choosing Paolo as the guy that you would want the most because you truly believe your team needs another high quality offensive option next to Cade? And then number two, does any of the defense concern you at all with Paolo because he wanted to play a very funnel centric defensive style at Duke? And God bless Isaiah Stewart. I love me some beef stew, but he's not even the same style of rim protector as like a Mark Williams that he had as Duke, for example. So really answer those two questions for me.
Yes. So I think offensively, that's where you're making this selection, because I do think that they need that second guy. Now, if you told me without a shadow of a doubt that they were going to sign, let's say, Jalen Brunson in free agency, and I know you don't want to talk fit. I get it. I understand. But that would change my mind just a little bit, because now he's not going to be able to do the stuff I was just talking about. It makes more sense for a Jabari Smith Jr. Defensively, I think Paolo's neutral in the NBA. You guys disagree with that?
What do you mean by, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I think you don't think he's going to be good, but you don't think he's going to be bad.
Yeah, I don't think he's a negative. Like, I don't think he's just getting cooked, but he's not. I don't think he's going to be like a really good switch defender if that's how he's going to play. I don't.
So on defense in particular, you think he's?
Yeah. Oh yeah, just defense. Just defense. I don't think he's a liability. Now, Nathan,
I think a lot of the stuff that comes back to Paolo defensively, and I had some of this conversation with Coach Spins over on the Box and One podcast when him and I talked about some of the top guys, was I think Paolo's issues defensively can be coached out. Yes. If he wants them to be coached out.
If he wants to, yes.
I don't think it's anything to do with his athleticism. I really don't think he has that slow of feet. He has the size to be able to handle different matchups in the post. I just think this gambling style of, I want to be the playmaker. I want to kind of funnel somebody to the basket, get behind them and swat the ball away or come in and deflect this ball. Like, we saw that enough in college to where it either didn't work for him because he wasn't that quick to be able to recover on that type of a play, or he chose to funnel somebody to the basket when Mark Williams wasn't even there. Like, he just completely was not aware of everything going on behind him. So I think if a coach can come in and really preach playing more of a team-centric style, better communication, better awareness as to what's going on in front of him and around him, and those are lessons he can learn over the next 2 or 3 years, I agree with you. I think he can be like a Tobias Harris style of defensive player, in the sense that you don't want him going out there and guarding everybody on an island one-on-one, but if he gets in certain matchups in certain spots, like, he can hold his own on the block and he can hold his own against different types of players. I think that's what Paolo can be.
Yeah, I guess all I want to say is, like, I think he can be a part of a good defensive team. I don't think he's going to completely hold you back, but he's not going to be the reason, which
correct.
I know Jabari could be one of the reasons you're a good NBA defense. And obviously I know that's a high upside value from Chet Holmgren as well.
So I love the idea of Paolo in Detroit. And what I really like about the way that the draft is shaping out, the one city that I would not want Paolo to go to would be Houston, because I think that it is more of like a glitz glam, especially with the teammates that he would have. I feel like they would be very, kind of out there with like maybe their personalities, and like they would very much care like what they wear.
You mean you don't want them throwing it back with Jalen Green and Jacob? You don't want that to happen?
I don't think so. And Kevin Porter Jr. is there. Like, I'm not talking negatively about them, but I just don't feel like that combination of young players in that particular city makes a lot of sense when you're wanting to potentially take a guy number 1 overall. When you're drafting Paolo to Detroit, like, that means something, especially with the history of that organization. You could even make a different kind of argument in Orlando, where it doesn't have the history, but it's Orlando. Like, you're going to be able to make mistakes and you're not going to have like paparazzi all over you. Right. So I like the idea of Paolo in Detroit because I feel like the city would hold him accountable. I feel like the history would kind of make him have to be a little bit more tougher on that defensive side of the ball, where, Nathan, we talked about this before. I feel like he kind of prefers to let the offensive player get a head start so he can try to get a chase down block. I'm not a big fan of that. Yeah. So the thing about Jabari in Detroit, I think that it works, but I think that him as a defender, you're not like, I feel like people could play up the defense so much that he's almost expected to be a savior on that side of the ball. And as great as I think Jabari is as a defender, I don't think that he is like a defensive anchor, whereas you can make that argument for potentially a Chet Holmgren, right? So I feel like the immediacy that Paulo would give you on offense, he might not be the best offensive player when everyone is hanging up their sneakers in this draft class, but in the immediacy, I like him a lot in Detroit. I feel like he helps out your team. And then Detroit, him not being a negative is a good thing too. And that's something you could build for follow-on draft classes and free agencies, what have you.
Yeah, and my thing with Jabari, listen, I love Jabari Smith Jr. and I love him
Me too.
even after diving into the film. I was like, oh my gosh, he's a better shooter than what I thought. I sat here, I record in my classroom, as you can see the whiteboard behind me, and I was just sitting here and I would literally go, holy cow, wow. Oh my, like it was just the shots he makes. He's not just a catch and shoot guy. He's 1-2 dribble pull up. He has the full bag in the mid post. My question would be, now you're asking Cade again to literally do everything off the bounce for the Pistons. And maybe Jabari's going to develop this. Like, who am I to say?
I think he will. I think he will, but it's not going to, like, you're not going to see it like maybe year 1, 2, maybe even 3, but I think the handle does get better.
And that's why I say, like, if you're telling me they're going to sign Jalen Brunson, then I'm like, okay, Jabari Smith Jr. makes a lot more sense, because now you have Jalen Brunson and that trio, that quartet with Saddiq Bey, it all kind of fits together. So I think I've fallen in love, maybe to a fault, a little bit with the idea of what Paulo can be as a creator with the ball in his hands. Maybe I'm wrong, but I've kind of fallen for that.
My argument for Jabari Smith to the Pistons, and that's really the one fit near the top of the draft that I really like. I have Chet number 1 on my board, and I'll ask you about Chet in a second. I would like Chet a lot more places. But the thing with Jabari is that Cade, you make a good point about offensive responsibility. Maybe you don't want him to have to do literally everything, but when Cade does have to do everything, how many guys does he have on the team right now to where he's passing it out? He knows that, like, this guy's going to knock down the shot, right? It's honestly like it's Saddiq Bey at the moment. Maybe Isaiah Livers when he comes in for stretches, and like that's about it. And I think that's really opens one of those things. Like, if he has more guys around him like Jabari, who he has confidence in offensively, maybe that would be like a psychological type of thing. Like, okay, if I just look to make the right play here, maybe it's not the flashiest play. Maybe it's not the one that leads directly to an assist. But if I skip the ball out here and I have this guy who can kind of hockey assist and boomerang it around to somebody like Jabari Smith Jr., I know the ball's going to get moved outside of me. It's going to go to the right spot, and that guy's going to knock it down. Like, maybe that in a way would also kind of help Cade Cunningham.
No, that's a really good point. And I do think there's a lot of truth to that. And the other thing is, like, one thing I loved about Jabari is, like, he just had this attitude in a positive way, like in a good way on the defensive end. Like, he just like he would fit. Detroit would love.
He is nasty, man. He is nasty. On both ends. He is nasty.
So him, Ben Mathurin, and I don't know if we're gonna get to
there.
This,
we go.
Ben Mathurin had a little bit more of that than what I realized, like just some like attitude and stuff, and then. For as slight as he is, Chet Holmgren like has that as well. And
so why not Chet in any of the 1A, 1B conversation? Where are you at on Chet before we move to like maybe 1 or 2 guys after him?
I'm not fully bought into everything with Chet, and I know everybody's tired of people talking about the body, and I get it. To me, it's not even about.
Wait, Bryce, people are talking about his body.
But before you think you're bad for mentioning it, you get into some of why it bothers you, Bryce. I've had people much smarter than me have come to me with some of those same concerns and explain why it's a concern. So like, as much as I don't want to talk about it all day and night, it is something that we technically have to talk about, because it's something that NBA teams are going to have to do their due diligence on and recognize.
And so the crazy thing is, it doesn't bother me as much on the defensive end. He's winning on the defensive end with his length and his timing and his competitiveness. Where I think it actually limits him is offensively. I've watched too many clips where like he couldn't push through contact whenever he's putting the ball on the ground. He's not going. I don't think he's going to the post and taking advantage of. I mean, a really bad mismatch. Obviously, he's going to take advantage of that. What kind of screener is he going to be with that frame? Like, all of those things kind of worry me. And I'm still trying to figure out, I'll be honest, of kind of the top 10 guys, he's probably the one guy I haven't watched like full game films on and really dove into quite as much. I'm not sure how much I buy into the offense. I'm just not sure. Maybe you can sell me. To me, I buy the shot. That's what I buy offensively. I think he can be a good passer. I think he can do some other things well, but like, I don't see like this true grab and go, just like create all this stuff off the bounce. I don't know.
Nathan is more of a believer in the offense, I think,
I
than
am.
almost anybody that
Okay.
I've spoken to. Like Nathan has high praise on what he thinks his high end outcome could be as an NBA scorer.
I think he has the highest ceiling. I'll admit that.
Sure. I just think at Gonzaga, he was used almost exclusively as a play finisher, whether that be on an easy catch around the basket, finish it, or catch, being able to bring the ball up, shoot as a trailer option,
Yeah.
or shoot from the perimeter off the catch. Like in both respects, play finisher. He didn't get the same types of touches that Paolo Banchero got at Duke, the same types of touches that Jabari Smith got at Auburn. Your point about being pushed off of his spots when he gets going off the bounce, 100% agree with that. That is a concern. However, I just think if he would have gotten more of those opportunities around the elbow to get into some of those jab step moves, him being able to showcase more of a shooting touch inside the arc, because whether you're right or not about him getting pushed off the spots, if he's kind of just there and he's going through like a triple threat kind of motion, like he could shoot over guys, he could shoot over virtually anybody. So like, sure. I just wonder if he would have had more touches in different spots on the floor, what that would have looked like for him. And I still buy into that type of offense on top of him cutting to the basket, him getting going in transition, the easy lob stuff. The free throw shoot, like there, in my opinion, like I understand people don't want to project him to be like a 20 plus points per game scorer because they don't see him doing it in the more traditional sense, but there's so many play types that you can involve him in to where he can build up to that 18 to 20 points per game. And then you get everything with him defensively.
Okay, so maybe that's where I'm at, because with Jabari and Paolo, I saw it game after game after game after game. I'm like, okay, I'm comfortable stamping my name onto Jabari Smith being able to do all this different stuff in the mid post. And with Chet, it was like, okay, here's a flash of it. Here's a flash of it. But what you're saying is I should trust that, because it wasn't that Chet couldn't do it more often. It was that he wasn't
given the opportunities.
Okay.
He honestly wasn't. Like,
okay.
That's where I'm at. And when he's put in those spots of the floor that Nathan is speaking to, Bryce, just to kind of, I'm not out on Chet, like obviously top 3 talent, but like I feel like I probably see more holes in his game, or am a little bit more, I don't know, like I think I believe in the holes a little bit more, if that's the right way to even say it. But I think that when he does get the ball in those spots of the floor that Nathan is talking about, he had to feed Drew Timme. Like it was when he got it on the elbow, it was the high-low game. He absolutely always had to get it to Drew Timme. Whereas in the NBA, I don't know how much of that high-low action he's going to be expecting to get. So when he is in those spots in the middle is a little bit more spread out because he's going to be the 4 or the 5, like he'll have a little bit more creation opportunity. And he'll have some of these guys that he can kick out to because he's a great passer, especially positionally.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say about Chet is that, and I know Tyler Rucker and Albert on our No Ceilings team got to see him live and in person out in Vegas, and they got to watch him warm up and kind of go through his pregame routine. And I just remember Rucker talking about everything he was practicing. He was practicing like Kevin Durant style shots out there, and he was making them with absolute ease. So it comes back to, if his body, his frame's not going to change. He's always going to be this very slight guy. He's going to struggle holding on and retaining any weight that he gains. But if he can just get stronger, if he just adds enough strength, I think so many of these concerns that we all have just go away. And then you can tap into more of the ball handling creativity on offense. Because we see it, I know it's not in these crammed half-court situations, but you see how fluid it can be in transition when he's bringing the ball up the floor. All of a sudden, he can get going off the bat. Like all of a sudden, he'll like zoom past multiple guys and he'll get to the rim. And you're like, we didn't necessarily see that coming from Chet. So it's more theoretical than some of what we could talk about with Jabari and Paolo, because I agree, Bryce, we've seen more examples of what those guys can do at greater volume. It's theoretical, but I'm buying into the theoretical creativity with Chet, and that's why I would have him number 1 over some of these other guys. But to kind of close out this podcast, let's just say in theory that the Pistons don't end up with a top 3 pick, and all 3
Nathan, I swear I wrote it down. If you weren't going to ask this, I was going to ask this. I'm so this is why we co-host the show today.
It has to be where we go. Cause I know Bryce has watched more than just like the top 3 guys, but if for whatever reason, those 3 big guys are off the board, it doesn't have to be the next guy on the consensus big board, but like, who is the one other name that you would love to see in a Pistons uniform?
I really like Benedict Mathurin. I already said his name once.
Man.
I don't think you take him at 4. And I think it's real easy to say if the Pistons land at 4, you trade out. Well, you got to find someone that has then fallen in love with Jaden Ivey or Shaden Sharp or maybe Keegan Murray. I don't know. You got to find somebody to trade with, right?
Yep.
Benedict Mathurin is a guy, I watched the film and I just really like his game. I like what he does. And everybody throws out the KCP comparison. I get it. I just think there's more of an upside that and again, me and Steven have talked about this. I'm going to learn a lot of lessons this season.
We all are. We all are.
On scouting prospects. I know part of my thing with Benedict Mathurin is that man is a smooth athlete, and it just is aesthetically pleasing watching him play the game of basketball. And that's just I know it catches my eye. I think he's a 3-and-D guy at worst, and he's a 20-point-a-game guy at best with some ability to create, and he's just got some dog and competitiveness in him that I really, really love.
You might as well close out the show, Steven, because that's your boy. You might as well take us home.
I mean, it's unbiased. Like, I didn't solicit Bryce for this opinion. So, I mean, the fact that, two smart guys are over here talking about how good Benedict Mathurin is, I mean, it just so happened, anyway, Bryce, what do you think about these two comps? Because I can't shake these when I watch Benedict Mathurin, and I'm going back a little bit, right? So I know you can hang with this. What do you think about like Michael Finley, Michael Redd kind of comparisons with that? Because when I watch him, like you said, offensively, do a lot of the work outside on the perimeter, can move the ball a little bit. It's not their forte necessarily, but are capable. And then obviously on the defensive end can do a little something. Like a lot of folks might remember Michael Finley as just like, on the Spurs or the Celtics, whatever, just like the statue in the corner. But I mean, young Michael Finley had some hops now, and Michael Redd for Milwaukee, an really Olympian, like really good company to be in. And when I watch Benedict Mathurin, like I can't shake a lot of the same similarities that in between his game and theirs.
No, I love that. Just smooth athletes. Michael Redd was smooth. That jumper was so smooth. What I really liked about Ben Math is whenever I watch film, I take a game early in the year and then just slowly progress throughout the season.
That's how you do it.
And you could see the progression of his ability to create for teammates. And that's what really kind of got me excited about him was early in the year, he wasn't doing much of that. Then he's playing in pick and roll a little bit more. He's dumping stuff off, making the pass to the weak side. The mid-range has to improve. It's a little bit worrisome.
I think he's got to make mechanical improvements from the mid-range. Like he's got to stop falling back exclusively on that shot. Like he's got to be much more upright when going up.
I want to ask one, and I know we're running long. I'm so sorry.
No, dude, go ahead.
In the Piston Pulse mock, we ended up with Jaden Ivey to the Rockets. And I want to ask you guys, how wonky is that fit? Or is it like so crazy that you love it? Because like Jaden Ivey and Jalen Green, is that amazing or is that a disaster?
Well, Steven, this technically counters your philosophy because you want to draft for fit over there, but you don't even necessarily want to do BPA all the time. So I know you.
So that's what we did.
Not all the time.
Okay, so let me give some context. The Pistons, we went the big three. I took Shaden Sharp number 4 for the Pistons. And so that left Ivy on the board for the Rockets at number 5. And me and Omari were bouncing back and forth. And Omari was like, I don't have any other choice. Like, I have to take Jaden Ivey. So you guys do this for a living. So I'm just like curious, what would you think if something like that actually happened?
So in that situation where it's the big figure off the board and Shaden Sharp's off the board, it's really a question of, okay, well, it's Jaden Ivey. Maybe it's Keegan Murray. Maybe you throw Benedict Mathurin in that conversation. I don't think it's crazy because, and this really hurts me, Bryce. I'm so sorry. I've made so many friends on Rockets Twitter. I don't want to slander anybody, but for as much as I love Kevin Porter Jr., is he the definite answer next to Jalen Green? And unfortunately, we don't have that answer from a consistency standpoint, right? Like at his absolute apex, he can be an awesome complementary piece next to Jalen Green. When he's at his best, getting downhill and pick and roll, spraying the ball everywhere, that can be something that works. But there's also just been plenty of moments throughout the season, particularly in the start of the year, where he just he didn't end up being that guy out of the gates that I thought he would be. Like I was on Chad Ford's podcast and we did like a top 10 ranking of guys who we thought could really make leaps out of the young guys. I had Kevin Porter Jr. like 4th on that board because I really thought he was due for a breakout year, much more in line with that 50-point game he had against the Bucks than some of the inconsistency he showed in the beginning of the year. If the inconsistent Kevin Porter Jr. is what you're going to have next to Jalen Green, I think the franchise is going to be forced to go in a different direction one way or the other. And in that scenario, if Jaden Ivey's on the board, I think the BPA kind of forces their hand and you would have to bring in Ivey. And that's maybe some view that as like an unfair competition of sorts, but that's disrespect at that point, in my opinion, to Jaden Ivey if you're passing on him because you don't think he's the best fit.
Well, and to me, like I think Kevin Porter Jr. has to have a realistic outlook on where he stacks up in relation to his peers' position.
And I still love him, man. I love Scoot.
Yeah.
I absolutely love Scoot. Like I want him to succeed so bad, but you're right. We got to be realistic, Stephen.
But like, what other team is he started? Like he's lucky that he went to Houston to have the opportunity to get as much burn and start time. So if you're drafting Ivey, you got to talk to Kevin Porter Jr. and be like, look, man, like we got to be real with you. Like we love you. You have a definite role and we need you on this team. But maybe that's being like a top 3-6 man in the nation or something like that, because if you want to leave, like we'll help you out or whatever, but there's not going to be a lot of teams out there for you, man, that are going to give you a starting opportunity. So you can stay here, play with your best friend and Jalen Green and be like one of the most athletic backcourts in the nation and still have a great role for you. But, you know, we have to take Jaden Ivey here. Like that would be my approach specifically for the Rockets, because if I'm looking at these other prospects that you could take at that position, like Dyson Daniels, I don't love in Houston. Malachi Branham, I don't know if he gives you really anything else. And none of these guys on the Rockets like make sense to me to draft over Jaden Ivey for that team.
So, like, are you guys comfortable giving Jaden Ivey the keys? Like, I guess that gets it more into like, because I guess me and Amari have talked more. We feel like Jaden Ivey's an off-ball player. So if Jaden Ivey ended up in Detroit, we actually think that's a great fit for Jaden Ivey because Cade can dominate the ball for the most part. Jaden Ivey can play off-ball. The shooting numbers, I don't know how much we believe in the shot, but it's been decent. But
it's nice.
Yeah, he can attack closeouts, get out in transition, but he doesn't have to be making all of these reads. And so I guess that's where we thought it was wonky, was like, you're handing him the keys to the car, and that's what best for Jaden Ivey?
I don't think that you are. I don't think that you're saying like Jaden Ivey, here's your franchise, because you have a guy.
I just need the ball in his hands.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Jalen Green's going to continue to have the ball in his hands a lot more too. Similar to Cade, like the Rockets were really putting the ball in his hands near the end of the season. That's how he got to a lot of those 30-point games that he had, because they're going to trust him to be more of a pick and roll creator as he develops further in his career. So if you have a guy like Ivey who can take some pressure off Jalen Green, can handle the ball in similar situations like Kevin Porter Jr. can right now, for example, maybe Ivey's just a more consistent player for you next to Jalen Green. I think that can work. And it would really be a lot of the same things with Cade, because I know that Jaden Ivey's highest ceiling outcome is as a point guard. And if you believe he's a point guard, you can argue him in that top 3 conversation. But unless he gets all the way to the basket, which again, he is so fast that maybe on an NBA court that I'm just underrating the fact that he probably will be able to get there so often. But if he gets in that mid-range area, man, it's like a no man's land for him. And he's just not, he doesn't have the mid-range pull-up jumper. He has touch, I think, on a runner, which is something I think he just needs to go to more. And if he can have that in his bag, I think that makes up for the lack of a mid-range pull-up. But he's got to have something, because these guards, these high volume, high usage guards that have the ball in their hands, that's really the one thing that they have to continue to develop and add to their bags. And I think Cade's not only going to have the 3-point shot, I think he's going to have a lot of that mid-range creativity, as we talked about, as he gets stronger. I don't have the answer for that with Jaden Ivey, which is why I'm projecting him. I think I have him like 5th right now on my board versus 4th. I actually have Shaedon Sharpe ahead of him, which
same.
I mean, that piece that I wrote for No Ceilings, I've said it on multiple shows. That was the hardest bit of writing that I've done in quite a while, because such limited tape. But from what I've seen, the star power, like, in my opinion, if the Pistons lose out on one of those top 3 guys, like Shaedon Sharpe is who I would go with to put next to Cade. But
And
I don't know how
and,
much you've seen of Shaden Bryce, but
and just real quick, Bryce, we turned it into a Houston Rockets podcast. The other thing that I'll say about Ivey to the Rockets that I like a little bit is that we've seen Ivey succeed playing off of playmaking bigs at Purdue, playing next to Alperen Şengün. Like there's another little built-in thing for comfortability to integrate him into that roster.
I've tried to watch as much Shaden Sharp as I can get my hands on. You know, like I've gone to the YouTube. I'm a guy, I want to watch full games. I don't want to watch the highlights. I don't want to watch the clip of just whether it's makes, misses, turnover. I want to see the full game. I want to be able to see how they look off ball on defense. I want to see how they move off ball on offense. So I want to go back and watch full
the off ball offense stuff looks good. The off ball defense,
for sure. He's a young basketball player. Yeah. He's a young basketball player.
Can you just really quick, can you maybe just hammer some of that home for our audience, Bryce, before we close out the podcast? Like we will go back and we'll evaluate these young guys and we'll expect them to be awesome on defense. But in reality, like the majority of these rookies coming into the NBA, like they're not good on defense. Like I think that's more or less something of what we have to live with. And can you teach them how to be better in certain respects versus expecting too much from them right away to the point where we overshadow some of the positive things they can do on the court.
And then also to play into that too, Bryce, like how important defensively in the NBA are physical dimensions instead of just like on-court productivity at the college level.
Yeah, I mean, I think me and Omari talked about this on the episode that NBA defense is hard. I think people try to simplify it. And again, guys, I've only been in this world for a couple years covering, content creation, whatever we want to call it for the NBA. And really, I was a college guy because that's where I played. That's where my career capped out. I'm a high school coach and the games are completely different. Like the level I coach at is completely different than, obviously the NBA, but even college. But I was one of those guys like, oh yeah, NBA guys just don't play that hard. If they try, like, no, NBA players are incredible offensively. You have a on-ball creator that you can't stay in front of no matter how gifted you are physically. You have a guy that's going to screen and can jump 12 feet in the air to catch the lob and unless you're the Pistons, 3 shooters around them to knock down shots. And it's like
the amount of space you have to cover defensively on an NBA court is ridiculous.
And you can't be in the lane. You can't just stand there and take a charge.
I was going to say the timing too. You're going to be in a spot for so long.
We coach our kids, get in the lane and take a charge, and we take 5 charges a game. And like, that's what we do. You can't do that in the NBA. It's not possible. And so the rotations, try to come up with a scheme to stop the Milwaukee Bucks. Tell me how you're going to do it. Because Giannis is beating everybody one-on-one. And if you double him, then the other guys are going to make shots. If you don't rotate perfectly, you're giving up an offensive rebound. It's really, really hard. And I think these kids are coming up. And because the high school game is completely different, because the college game is completely different.
And they're only in college for 1 year.
For 1 year. Of them. They don't know how to guard.
If that for Shaden Sharp.
He practiced for a few months. But
sure.
Like it takes a lot of development. It takes a lot of awareness.
It takes communication and just familiarity with your teammates. Like the chemistry. It takes years to develop that stuff.
And that's what like Pistons fans got mad because Rex Kalamian, the assistant coach, who's like the DC, is switching everything. And it's like, I went to the film. They can't execute anything other than switch everything. They can't switch with Stu, drop with Bagley, only switch 1 through 4 off ball screens. It was just too much. They couldn't communicate it. The chemistry wasn't good enough. It takes years of that kind of stuff to develop that kind of team defense.
If you have the same coach for that long.
And the same players.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, Bryce, I listen, I knew this was going to be a good podcast, but this was better than I think I ever could have expected, man. You are incredible at what you do. And I'm glad that you and Steven are bros and that this was an easy connection for us to make to bring you on the podcast. Cause this was exactly what all of our listeners deserved. If they are Detroit Pistons fans out there and they want to learn more about the team and what to expect in the offseason, the draft, this was what they needed. So I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. Just one more time from audience, please plug yourself, plug every single thing that you're doing, because anybody who follows us and our work need to be following what you're doing in the NBA space.
It's imperative.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. And I had a blast. I know you can't see the video, but I had a smile on my face the entire time. And I've been dreading the end the entire time. I've been looking at the clock. I know we're going long.
They can see the video. We're going to be on YouTube, baby. Come on. We got Draft Deeper on YouTube.
Perfect.
Everyone wave at Bryce.
So earlier when I was looking like an idiot doing whatever, everybody's going to see it. But I've just been I don't want this to end because I'm having so much fun. But Bryce Simon at Motor City Hoops on Twitter. Got a YouTube channel going, post some videos, doing some draft stuff at Mavs Draft, do some articles on DBB, Detroit Bad Boys, and then check out the Pistons Pulse if you want more Pistons content. My co-host is Omari Sankofa II, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press. You guys are the GOATs. I love everything you're doing. I always listen to Draft Deeper and No Ceilings for my NBA draft content.
Man, there Bryce, you are an absolute legend, man. It's been a pleasure and an honor to get to know you more, just on a personal level,
yes,
as well as continuing to talk basketball. You're truly one of the best professionals in the game, man. So I'm glad to have you on the show tonight.
Absolutely.
Plug yourself, Steven. Do what you always do every time you're on.
And for sure, if folks want to follow me, most active on Twitter at Steven G Hoops. That's Steven with a PH, the letter G, and then Hoops. You can also find all of my written work on NoCeilingsNBA.com. The most recent episode or article that I have for the Weekend Warrior is up, where featured Ron Harper Jr. Talked a little bit about why ageism is gross, and then of course kind of updated players that declared for the draft and some of the transfer portal guys. Obviously that'll be updated this upcoming Sunday. And then our guys Nathan, Corey, and Rucker, they had an awesome episode of On the Clock Drop on our No Ceilings TV YouTube channel. Again, for the listeners who are unfamiliar, that's kind of their take on the Pardon the Interruption spin. And it's a great show. It's great bite size. If you got 15 minutes, you can watch and enjoy some great draft content from our No Ceilings collective brethren there.
Definitely make sure you're subscribed not only to their YouTube channel, No Ceilings TV, I should say our YouTube channel, but when I say ours, I also mean Draft Deeper as well. Make sure you're checking out the podcast on YouTube. Make sure you're listening and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and of course, NoCeilingsNBA.com. I just put out a piece today as we're recording this on May 2nd. I put out a piece on Michael Foster Jr.
Fantastic article.
Why he's my hidden gem in the 2022 NBA draft second round. Got to tie into my alma mater, Temple University, a little bit with that piece as well. So that was a special way for me to start my week, as was this podcast as well. So definitely make sure you're staying tuned to all things No Ceilings NBA on Twitter, NoCeilingsNBA.com. And on the Draft Deeper front, we will have plenty more content for you in the coming weeks. But until then, thank you all for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.
Much love, everybody.